You're listening to WPVM 1037 in Asheville, North Carolina, also known as Radio Asheville. We've got Dr. Chris Cooper in to interview today about his recent article in Politico, Tom Tillis and the Painful Truth About Swing State Politics. Even the most competitive and evenly balanced states are infected by the same contagion as the hardened one-party states. Dr. Cooper, welcome. How'd you come up with this opinion piece?
Well, thanks. Appreciate you having me on to talk about it. You know, it's just sort of came to me a lot from just watching North Carolina politics and thinking through, sort of this puzzle that I've had, and I think other folks have had for a long time, right? And I try to tackle some of this in this book I had come out last year called Anatomy of a Purple State. But the idea is, look, you look at a guy like Tom Tillis, you say, okay, he's not going to be loved by everybody, but he is somebody who has been somewhat of a voice of moderation. I know some folks on the left are going to not like that, and some folks on the right may not like that as well. But the data suggests that is very much the case, right? Here's somebody who did sometimes deviate from his party line, and that in today's modern times makes you a voice of moderation. So you look at somebody like that, and then you say, but he should be pretty popular, right? We're a purple state. We're a state that's somewhere in the middle. But the reality of what we see when we look at his approval rating, when we look at his decision to retire, when he didn't have to, is evidence that moderation doesn't always beget moderation. And so the reason for that is that we're all in this big nationalized political environment. And if you're in a state like North Carolina, it doesn't mean that, we've got 7.5 million purple voters running around. It means we have about half blue and about half red, and it averages to something like purple. And so in a world where we have these primary electorates who decide who becomes the general election candidate, then each extreme is going to exert a lot of their will. And the same thing is true in North Carolina as it would be in a red state like Oklahoma or a blue state like California. And so it's just really trying to understand that puzzle and sort of let folks know that, man, I wish it was true that moderation begets moderation, but that's not the world we live in.
Senator Tillis was at the height of his power, a former House Speaker, an influential senator from a key swing state. What made him walk away from all of that?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of it is Donald Trump. Isn't that the answer to so much of our politics today, right? So Tillis had been, taking some shots from the left, of course, and taking some shots from the far right. But it did appear he was going to run for office. And so, all the signs we would look for would say that he was going to run again. And to me, the most critical one of those was about, a month ago or so, he announced his campaign staff. That campaign staff included people like Paul Shoemaker, who is a well-seasoned, probably the most prominent Republican consultant in the state of North Carolina. But he also had a bunch of Trump-aligned folks, including a pollster who Donald Trump himself had used. And so I thought, okay, well, here's a guy who's running for office. But then he took some opposition to the so-called One Big Beautiful Bill and said that he thought that this, sort of cutting of Medicaid benefits would be disastrous economically to a state like North Carolina, but also to its citizens in terms of health care. And so he said, hey, I'm standing up against this thing. And that brought Donald Trump on him with both barrels. And with both barrels for Donald Trump means social media posts. And so he posted on Truth Social about how he wanted to take out Tom Tillis and get a primary opponent. And I don't think it's a coincidence that the very next day, Tom Tillis said, you know what, I've just had enough.
So, Dr. Cooper, how unprecedented is it for a president to actively seek challengers against members of his own party?
This publicly, it's very unusual, right? So this does happen behind the scenes, and it happens at the state level too. So and it actually happens on the Democratic Party sometimes. So I think there's a lot of evidence and stories about how a guy named Kirk Deviated, who was a very conservative Democrat in the North Carolina General Assembly, was primaried out partly because then Governor Roy Cooper thought he was, challenging the party orthodoxy too often. So it does happen, but usually it happens behind the scenes like that, right? Roy Cooper didn't come out blasting with both barrels on social media about it. He got his folks lined up to to do the job, essentially. So what makes Trump so different is that he does it in the open. He tells everybody about it. He brags about it in these, lengthy posts with questionable capitalization throughout.
So in that regard, then, Dr. Cooper, what's your opinion of some very wealthy person threatening to establish a new party?
Yeah, so might we be talking about Elon Musk here, right?
Might we be?
So Elon Musk has threatened to start his own political party. I think that is very, very, very unlikely to be successful. And if we had more time today, I probably would have added varies for the next 28 minutes or so, right? The point is, I don't think it's going to happen, at least not in terms of being successful. And the reason for that is that our entire system is set up for just the opposite. So there are ways in which you can have political systems, governmental systems, electoral systems that are set up to get multiple parties. We see a lot of those in Europe. Our system is set up to do the exact opposite, right? Our system is set up to produce no more than two really successful parties. Part of that is we vote for people in these single member districts, meaning, right, you vote for one member of Congress, for example, at a time. And we also have what's technically called first past the post elections. And all that really means is the person with the most votes wins, right? We don't have a proportional representation system like they have in other places. And so for Elon Musk to be able to pull this off, he has to fight this very ingrained part of the system. He also has to get on the ballot in a bunch of states. And as we've seen, that's incredibly difficult. And as a matter of fact, the name of his party, the America Party, I believe it is, isn't even allowed in the state of New York because you're not allowed to have a political party with the name America in it in the first place. So getting on the ballot, making this work, it is very close to impossible to pull off, even somebody with the means of Elon Musk.
And the ego.
And the ego of Elon Musk, yes. And don't those two things often come together, right? If you have that much money, the odds are pretty good you've got that ego. And I think that is Elon Musk, right? He really believes that he can do what literally no one else has been able to do. And heck, there's a first time for everything. We can talk about this after the fact if I'm proven wrong and Elon Musk is right. But I would put a lot of money to say that's it's not going to happen.
Well, we are certainly in a brave new world of digital access. It's never been available before. And that could possibly have an effect because he does have an audience over Twitter of gazillions. Plus, he's the wealthiest man in the world. Maybe he can do something.
It certainly helps, right? And he'll get more attention as a result of it, right? I mean, here we are talking about Elon Musk and this political party, in Western North Carolina. So he's very good at getting attention. But he's going to need more than that, right? He's going to need ballot access. That's just a fact.
Right.
And he's also going to need candidates. And sort of let's step back and think about that for a second. Who would be a candidate who is not already captured by MAGA, but who would tend to agree with Elon Musk on most policy positions and be the kind of person who could actually get elected, right? That's a pretty small list. And so the notion of this party, even Musk now, he says, hey, maybe I'm not going to contest the presidency. Well, that's smart. He says, I'm just going to go ahead and, do a few key races. But can Elon Musk find somebody in Maine, for example, who fits that profile? I don't know that he can. Again, we'll see. I think if he really wanted to grow a true party over time, the place to start is at the local level and the state level, right? It is to try to win county commissions and city councils and a few state legislative seats and sort of build up. But that's not an Elon Musk way to do things, right? Elon Musk way to do things is you start big and then you figure out the bottom of the barrel later.
Yeah, and then you fall.
You explode if you're one of his rockets or any of the other things.
Tillis's decision is too much of a coincidence to be a coincidence and is a testament to the ability to inject fear of Trump into long-term seasoned politicians.
That's right. Yeah, Trump is very, very good at that. And you're right. I think Tom Tillis that was just ultimately too much. And Tillis did give a few signs, hindsight's 2020, but he put out
Right.
a release about, I don't know, 2 or 3 months ago, talking about the death threats that he was getting. It's horrible stuff, right? And just how much it was affecting his life, his family's life. So it's almost like he was signaling, hey, things aren't, I'm not loving this right now. And then you get both barrels from Donald Trump. And heck, maybe it's the most rational thing Tom Tillis has done in decades to say enough is enough, 2 terms is enough. And by the way, let's remember, he didn't resign. He said he's not running again. So what we're going to have now is 18 or so months of Tom Tillis completely unplugged, not having to follow everything that the president says. I don't think he's going to turn into a rabid liberal. I don't think he and Bernie Sanders can be co-sponsoring legislation anytime soon. But I do think he may have even more of an independent streak for the next year and a half.
Well, that's interesting, and it may be ominous. You make a fascinating point that purple states don't actually have purple voters, just red and blue voters in equal numbers. Explain why this distinction matters.
Yeah, I think it matters because it's exactly what leads us to things like Tom Tillis, right? So a candidate of some moderation being not voted out of office by any stretch, but just deciding enough is enough and having approval ratings hovered around 25%. Probably not coincidentally, that's the same approval rating we're seeing for Susan Collins in Maine, another fairly purple state. You've got Susan Collins, obviously, somebody who's taken some moderate positions, not popular from either side. I think it also explains why you see folks like Ted Budd. And look, folks may love Ted Budd, they may not love Ted Budd, but here's somebody who is a conservative's conservative, right? He is definitely to the right of the average voter in the state, but his approval ratings are higher than moderate Tom Tillis. And so I think it explains a lot of why we get the candidates we get as opposed to these moderate candidates that we might think that you would get from a purple state like North Carolina.
And North Carolina has a vivid and checkered past of political extremes. Jesse Helms comes to mind.
Somebody like Jesse Helms from the state like North Carolina, you could very, ask that same kind of.
With Jesse Helms, you had Jim Hunt voted in as governor. And in Western North Carolina in this past election, several of the outer counties towards the Tennessee border turned blue.
It's a fascinating place to study politics, to watch politics, because you do get these inconsistent messages, right? Yeah, how do you vote for Jesse Helms at the same time as you're voting for Jim Hunt? Just over my right shoulder, I've got an old poster of Jesse Helms and a guy named John West, who were both very prominent, very, very, very conservative Republicans who were being elected in North Carolina, while you've got, a series of governors really who gave North Carolina the reputation as being very progressive on a number of issues like education, like roads, like many of the social services. So yeah, it's a puzzle, and I think that puzzle is not solved, but sort of illustrated a little bit, or we could help understand it by sort of getting rid of this convenient fiction that we have more moderates in other places. We really don't. We just have a whole lot of red and a whole lot of blue.
Well, statistically, North Carolina has more independents than Democrats or Republicans. Yet you're right, that doesn't seem to make much of a difference.
And I wish it would, right? But it doesn't, and it doesn't for a few different reasons. So just to step back for a second, you're of course absolutely right. So unaffiliated in 2017 crossed Republican to become the second largest group of registered voters in the state of North Carolina. And about 2 years ago, crossed Democrat to become the largest group of registered voters in the state of North Carolina. If you are under the age of 40, the odds are that you are an unaffiliated voter. If you are new to the state, the odds are you are an unaffiliated voter. But the reason this doesn't translate to necessarily more moderate politics, or even the sort of idea of third party politics being successful, is a couple, twofold really. One, just because you're unaffiliated, of course, doesn't mean you don't lean far left or far right. You may have an AOC poster in your on your wall next to a Bernie Sanders poster, or you may have a closet full of MAGA hats, and you're still registered as unaffiliated. So sometimes those unaffiliated voters are what we call shadow partisans. They're just people who don't want to be identified as such. But I think the larger reason is that if we don't have a good, easy way for unaffiliated candidates to get on the ballot, right? So we're all socialized to voting for Democrats and Republicans. And we know when we go to vote what a DNR stands for, right? So have you ever gone to vote? Don't answer this out loud, but sort of think for the listeners out there. Have you ever gone to vote and you didn't really know all the details of the people running for some office way down the ballot, but you know that you tend to identify as a Democrat or Republican? That person does. Therefore, you cast that vote. Now ask yourself, have you ever done that and there's no D or R? It's a nonpartisan election. What did you do there? For a lot of folks, they actually skip over those offices, right? It just really shows how much harder it is to get elected if you are an unaffiliated candidate. And we saw actually a great example of that, I think, in Buncombe County, right? So our county commission chair race, of course, we had Amanda Edwards winning, the Democrat, but Van Duncan ran as an unaffiliated, and his pitch, you can love it or hate it, but his pitch I thought was pretty reasonable. He said, look, we got mostly unaffiliated people here. I'm unaffiliated. Come vote for me. I'm the one who can get past this. I've been elected before countywide. It was a reasonable pitch. What happened? He got beat, and he got beat badly. And yeah, you can pick on that example and say, well, maybe he wasn't the right candidate for that place. But we see that time and time and time again. In Transylvania County, there were 3 Republican county commissioners. They decided to switch to unaffiliated because they weren't wild about Donald Trump. What happened to all 3 of them? Voted out of office, voted out of office, voted out of office the second they switched to unaffiliated. We saw a candidate in the eastern part of the state named Shalane Etchison, who was the first unaffiliated candidate ever to run for Congress in the state of North Carolina. First of all, let's think about that for a second. It took from 1978, when we created this unaffiliated category, to 2024 to get a single person to run as unaffiliated for Congress. She's a good candidate, right? Folks may not like her, they might like her, but very moderate, very good candidate, telegenic, had a military background, like a lot of the check boxes you'd look for. She got creamed. Why'd she get creamed? Because she was running as unaffiliated. So it's really next to impossible, unfortunately, without big structural change to get unaffiliated or third-party candidates to win.
Going back to the Elon Musk ambitions to be a kingmaker, what you observe is kind of the handwriting on the wall that puts a damper on that being a successful challenge.
Not at all, right? It's going to be incredibly difficult. And we don't even have to look very far back in North Carolina. Remember the No Labels Party? Right, this started with great fanfare in North Carolina. And the pitch was a good one and a reasonable one on its face. Hey, we more unaffiliated than anything else, so we're going to create this party called No Labels. And they saw a few folks register for it. Well, guess what just happened to No Labels? They didn't run anybody for office, and they weren't able to keep it going. So it just dissolved. It was the life and death of No Labels came, both the birth and the death came within about 1.5 years of each other, right? And the reason is they just couldn't do it, despite the fact that they had, at least on its face, a pretty reasonable message.
Well, then is there any way for a politician to be truly moderate in today's environment? Or is that political approach simply becoming extinct in our country?
It's extremely difficult, right? It might have worked for Tom Tillis. Like, had he decided to stay, I do think he would have won the primary. So a lot of smart folks disagree with me about that, but incumbent senator has not lost a primary since, in over a dozen years. It's getting pretty late. I think he probably would have won it. It's a coin toss whether he would have won the general election or not. So it's possible. But boy, is it difficult. And it's really difficult to emerge like that. Tom Tillis emerged as Speaker of the House in North Carolina, was considered more of a rock rib Republican at that point than he was in today's MAGA world. And so I think the story of Tillis is a story of almost creeping moderation, which might explain his success. He didn't really run as a moderate, at least at the beginning. and even arguably in his second term. So I am concerned that we may not be seeing many more moderate candidates come out. And on both sides of the aisle, when you look at these folks, look, you may love them, and that's great, but they don't tend to be very moderate. Look at a guy like Roy Cooper, somebody like Josh Stein. When we analyze their voting patterns when they were in the North Carolina State Senate, what we see is they were reliably Democratic liberal votes when they were in office. And again, if you're a good Democrat, you love that. You think that's a positive thing. And in some ways, that's exactly my point, is moderation briefs well, but if you happen to care about one party more than the other, it's probably not the candidate who you actually want.
You also mentioned Patrick McHenry's retirement. Are we seeing a broader exodus of pragmatic Republicans who can't navigate today's political waters? Both McHenry and Tillis were in pretty safe seats, as far as at least McHenry was in a safe gerrymandered seat.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So I mean, Tillis, of course, wasn't, his seat couldn't be gerrymandered because he's running for the United States Senate, right? So he's got the whole state.
Right.
But with McHenry, you're absolutely right. I mean, he had the safest of safe seats, and folks in Asheville who've been around a while, of course, remember Patrick McHenry as being the representative of most of Asheville for a few years. He was, by no means a moderate. I mean, he was a very conservative member of Congress. At the same time, he was kind of an institutionalist, if you want to think about it that way, right? Somebody who still believed in, quote, regular order in the United States Congress, the kind of person who wasn't super comfortable with kind of violating norms of Congress. And he kind of believed that Congress as an institution was really important. So again, very conservative voting patterns, right? So it's not perfect similarities to Tillis, but I think there are some in the institutionalist perspective. And so Patrick McHenry, if you may remember, takes over as interim Speaker of the United States House for a moment. He had a big, heavy gavel that he smashed. He got on a lot of media coverage for it. A lot of people thought that perhaps he could actually be the new Speaker. So he's at, love him or hate him, he's at the height of his political power by any metric we would use. And what did Patrick McHenry decide to do? He decided to step down. He said, enough is enough. I don't really want to be a part of Congress anymore. And he's been pretty circumspect in his conversations after, but he has said that governing as a Republican, particularly with Donald Trump as president, is a different beast than the one that it used to be. And so he said, enough is enough. And I think it, again, is something that's worth thinking about if you're trying to understand the types of people who run for office, the types of people who continually decide to run again and again and again. Maybe the institutionalists are the ones who are opting out, and the folks who want to break the system, they're the ones who are more likely to stay in.
Both Tillis and McHenry have hightailed it out of Congress at the top of their game, not because they lost an election or got caught in a scandal, because they wanted to escape the madhouse. What does it say about our system when folks who actually know how to govern are running for the exits?
I think it says that maybe it's not such a great gig to be in Congress, right? Particularly as a Republican right now. That's not any comment on the ideology of conservatism or of Republicans in general, what they believe in. It's just that Donald Trump is ruling the Republican Party like we've never seen a president rule their own party. Was Barack Obama important for the Democrats? Absolutely. He centered media coverage, he centered rhetoric, he centered all sorts of things. But his power was nowhere near as absolute as Donald Trump's is over the Republican Party now. George W. Bush, same thing. Republicans liked him, of course. He was a figurehead when he was president of the United States. If he said something, the party tended to follow, but nothing like this, right? He wasn't getting on Facebook at that point, or MySpace, or whatever people were using, Friendster, and posting about certain people he wanted out of office. And so I think it says it's pretty tough. If you're not aligned perfectly with Donald Trump's vision, it's probably pretty difficult to be a Republican in Congress right now.
Then let's turn to the other side of the aisle. Democrats are in a changing world. They seem to be either in shock or disarray. Got any insights or guidance or tips for what they're dealing with?
Yeah, I mean, my take in some ways would be that the Democrats are searching too hard. That if you just step back for a second, just ignore the candidates, and I know that's difficult, but let's just play this game for a minute. So we ignore who was on either side. We ignore Biden and Harris, and we ignore Trump, and we say, all right, if we look at the state of the economy and we look at the popularity of the incumbent president, what would we expect to happen? And the answer is we would expect the Republican Party to have won by about the same percentage that Donald Trump won by in the last election, right? So maybe some of this was baked in, if you will, to the way that voters were going to respond. If we look at North Carolina, Democrats were incredibly successful. Of course, they didn't run the table, nor should they in a purple state, frankly, but they won 5 out of the 10 Council of State seats statewide, right? 5 out of 10, including governor, lieutenant governor, and attorney general, right? The 3 biggest of the big. The Democrats were able to win. They were also able to barely, I will grant you, but break the Republican supermajority in the North Carolina General Assembly. They were also able to win the only even a little bit competitive congressional district in the state, which is the first congressional district that Don Davis won. And famously, they also won by a hair, but they won the state Supreme Court race for Allison Riggs. So, like, that's a pretty good year for Democrats. And for Democrats to do that in North Carolina on the same ballot as Donald Trump won, I don't want to call it extraordinary, but I do want to say it's not exactly a time for consternation. It's, to me, a time for the Democrats to say, okay, why were we so successful and how do we double down on that?
When you were gathering your thoughts and doing your research for this article for ProPublica, do you ever think, good Lord, this is so absurd that if I put it in a novel or a movie script, the editor would reject it for being way too far-fetched? Because that's where we are. Reality has become too bizarre for fiction.
I think that almost daily as I think about North Carolina politics and kind of why, and really just national politics. I mean, it is wild to think all these storylines that we have going on simultaneously. And I hate to even say storylines, right? Because that almost minimizes their importance. I mean, these are incredibly important actors. The legislation that's being passed right now, policies that are coming out, is going to affect whether people live or die, right? It doesn't get any more serious than what's happening. But it is simultaneously absolutely wild. I mean, this Elon Musk thing is something out of a bad buddy comedy, right? Where the 2 main characters are buddies for a while, but their egos are too much to be in the same place at the same time. So they set up rival PI firms. I don't know. It does seem like something sometimes out of a novel, or at least an after-school special.
The ruler Marcus Aurelius, back in the days of the Stoics, said, "The object of life is not to be on the side of the majority, but to escape finding oneself in the ranks of the insane." And so I guess it's nothing new in politics. This stuff has been around for a very long time. So we're ending the interview. Do you have any words of wisdom, points, or observations to leave with the listener?
No, I just thanks for having me on, of course, and thanks for doing what you do. Maybe have a signing off comment. It would be that it's hard to keep track of everything that's going on right now. And so oftentimes people will ask me, how do I make sense of the noise? And the best answer I have is to lean into the local, which includes stations like this,
Right.
a part of government where you can really, truly make a difference. One vote does matter in this case, and showing up at meetings matters, and being informed and aware of what's happening locally is critical. So just lean into the local.
Thank you, Dr. Cooper, for mentioning WPVM's efforts to inform the voters of local, regional, statewide, and even national elections. We do our best, and I believe we do a pretty decent job of bringing the candidates to our local forums that we set up. And thank you for being part of that moderation process. We're signing off. Thank you for listening to WPVM Radio Asheville, and thank you, Dr. Cooper.